I'm Stacey Williams-Ng. I'm the author of The Rhythm and Soul Tarot, and today I'm going to take you on a walkthrough of the Major Arcana. After this, I have 4 additional videos that walk through each of the 4 suits. The 4 suits of the Rhythm and Soul Tarot, because it is themed on the legacy of American music, are based on the 4 foundational genres of American pop music: jazz, blues, rock and roll, and country. So I will talk about that more in the next videos. But what you're going to see today is a walk through the musician's journey, or the fool's journey, in the Major Arcana. So let's get started. Today we're going to be talking specifically about the Major Arcana. And please see my other videos. I have 4 other ones of each of the minors to talk about those themes in depth. Let's get started. Okay, so I'm not going to shuffle this deck. Okay, so I'm not going to shuffle it because I want to go through the deck in order, one at a time. I do have the book right here, and we can refer to the book, and I probably will at certain points, but you know, I wrote it. So I'm not going to shuffle the deck. I'm going to go in order like an unboxing, and I'm going to walk you through the Major Arcana one by one. Let's start with the Fool card. So in this image, we see a little girl with silly socks on, carefree, running through the countryside, presumably somewhere in Appalachia, let's say, and she's got her first musical instrument. And the butterflies are showing symbolically her sense of freedom and youth and spontaneity. So unlike the Fool in a classic Rider-Waite-Smith deck, she's not about to go off the edge of a cliff. There's no dog following her. So you'll see right away that I didn't follow Rider-Waite symbolism, but I went based on the story of a musician. This is the Fool's journey as seen through a musician's life. So the Magician, card number 1, you can do whatever you like, right? You have all the tools at your disposal. The Magician tells us that you have everything you need. This magician is based on a root worker. A root worker, or a conjure worker in the South, is a root doctor. It's someone who's sort of like a witch doctor, and they practice hoodoo, which is a fundamentally African-American practice that is based in African traditional religion, but is uniquely American. And it's an individual practice. It's not like voodoo, which we're going to talk about in a moment. But the reason I have a conjure worker here as the Magician, as such an important card, is because Mojo, you know, Memphis used to be called Mojo City. And the kind of magician you would find where I'm from would have been a witch doctor, would have been a hoodoo man. And so he appears in many songs, you know, the Hoodoo Man and Get Your Mojo Workin' and all these things. And so it's definitely a musical reference that anybody from the Delta South would understand. Speaking of voodoo, so the High Priestess is in fact a priestess of voodoo, and she is in a Louisiana swamp. So we have gone from a reference to northern Mississippi or Memphis, West Tennessee, which is the Mississippi Delta and its form of magic. We've gone from Appalachia here to West Tennessee / northern Mississippi, and now we're in Louisiana. Notice that all of these places are really where American music was born. And so that's an important part to note. You know, my first deck was the Southern Gothic Oracle, and I am like a 12th or 13th or 14th generation Southerner. I mean, these folks were here before these states were even formed that are my ancestors. And so I have grown up in Memphis, Tennessee, and around the Delta Sound. And so that is why I was inspired to make this deck. It really speaks to the way I was brought up and my extended family. So this is also modeled by my friend Camille, who is actually a practitioner of voodoo. So you're getting a real voodoo priestess in this image. And she symbolizes, just like in a classic tarot deck, the idea of secrets that you already know, that the cosmos and you are united, that you already know good from evil, you have all the secrets you need. And she clutches this book, and it's sort of hidden behind her hip a little bit, which is indicative of the High Priestess, almost like with the roll that says T-O-R-A in the classic High Priestess in the Rider-Waite-Smith. She has a book of secrets. And if you know anybody who practices voodoo, voodoo practitioners are very secretive. This is an organized religion, predominantly Haitian, although it's here in the US. So she's a Louisiana voodoo practitioner. but she is also dressed in the colors and with the symbol of the Simbi, which are the swamp spirits. And there are little lights all around her, which for all of us think, oh, that just makes it look more magical. But those are actually meant to represent the feu-follets, which are sort of little sprites that Louisianans believe in. It's a magical character like fairies in Louisiana. The Empress is not called the Empress. She's called the Mema. I had a Mema. My mother is called Mema by my children. This is just something down here. It comes from the French Mema. Some people say Mama, depending on which part of the South you're from. Some people say Mama with a more twangy Tennessee accent. I'm in the latter category. We have Memas in our family. When my kids have kids, I'll probably be Mema. This was a choice on my part not to have the Empress be a maternal figure specifically, like a pregnant young woman symbolizing fertility, but more of an elder with silver hair. And so this Mema is sitting in a field symbolizing still fertility and the earth. She has a crown of flowers and stars, just like our Empress. She still represents all the things that our Empress usually represents, but I thought that she would be so much more inspiring in this story if she were a grandma or a Mema. So of course, to match the Mema, we have to have a Papa. Papa is what my father is called by my children. So the Papa is granddad. And since the emperor sets the rules, he's the patriarch of the supposed family that we are all in. He's just an archetype of a perfect patriarch. He's number 4. He sets the 4 corners. He defines the rules, just like in any emperor deck. But my emperor has a little fiddle over here. He might be from Appalachia. He might be from, Alabama or Arkansas, but he definitely plays the fiddle. So when we talk about porch cards, I will get to that at the end of this video. And I want to talk a little bit about what symbolism I built into the cards that feature a front porch. Because in the South, the front porch is such an important stage in our lives. The preacher, number 5. So instead of the Hierophant, we have the preacher, which is a lot more symbolic of the South. And the idea of the preacher man certainly features in a lot of early rock and roll music, especially when you consider the roots of gospel moving into soul and blues and so on. The preacher man, and especially a river preacher, is definitely a mythic and iconic character in Southern folklore. So he represents really the same things that the Hierophant represents: tradition, the old ways, and things like that, especially when you think about how all of the music that came from this era was always, quote unquote, secular. So it was always this tussle between the new, the devil's music, versus sacred music. And that's a really important narrative that happens in all of these musical forms that we talk about in this tarot. The Lovers, number 6. We have these this little romantic couple. I know that in many decks, the Lovers is moving more toward its classical meaning of being about decisions. It's not entirely about lovers or couplehood and so on. So this certainly differs from the Rider-Waite or other decks in terms of the classic correspondence of what the Lovers card can mean. I really did go with a much more romantic approach for the Lovers. You can read it any way you want, but my painting is calling out this couple who only have eyes for one another, even though they're in a juke joint, and you can see behind them everyone's dancing fast and having a wild party, but those two are slow dancing and in their own world. So it's a much more classical romantic approach to the Lovers. I had a little fun with this one with the Chariot. You can still read it like any Chariot card in terms of good, evil. I don't have anything except Elvis's pink Cadillac because it was a fun visual pun. I'm just going to be honest with you. But I've seen a lot of Chariot cards where you have the vehicle interpreted in many, many different ways. And I thought, what more iconic vehicle for rock and roll than Elvis's pink Cadillac? And of course, the pink Cadillac has also been sung about by Bruce Springsteen and Aretha Franklin and many other greats. John Prine sang about the pink Cadillac too. So it was a fun, iconic Southern music archetype to make that the Chariot. Passion. So as many of you know, in the Thoth deck by Aleister Crowley, or Crowley, I should say. I have to learn to say Crowley. I know that's the correct pronunciation. His card is not number 8, but it is the correspondent strength card, and he called it lust, famously. And then, of course, in the Rider-Waite and in Golden Dawn and other symbolism, you've got the number 8 being the strength card, showing a woman with a lion. I really liked the idea of having lust, even though I'm not a Crowley fan, in my deck, because sexual awakening is such an important part of the musical journey, and sex is such an important topic in most of the pop music we listen to. So I wanted there to be this very sultry, sexy, coming of age, maybe even going to the madam kind of suggestion here, this Beale Street madam, if you know what Beale Street is here in Memphis. And so my model here, my friend Tanika, is modeling here with a lion. And the lion, just like in old versions of Western art, represents our animal nature. There were always these images in old paintings of a woman taming a lion, taming a unicorn, and it was supposed to signify the woman taming her sexual desires. So this really has to do with sexual awakening. Number 9, the Hermit, self-explanatory. I always say when I have someone who's new to tarot reading, you pull a card like the Hermit, and they often smile and say, yeah, that sounds like me. Here we have someone who resembles Hank Williams Sr. I was inspired by his song, I Saw the Light. When I think about the Hermit with his lantern, and he's alone in the world, and he's exploring the self in this time period. We've got the crescent moon, which is a classic correspondence. This is a country music kind of reference to the Hermit. The Wheel of Fortune is a jukebox. It's also a giant record. No, jukeboxes don't look like that. It's from my imagination. It's a dreamy jukebox, but it's supposed to conjure up the dreamlike notion of a record, and the sizzling influence of luck and chance in our life. You know, this bubbling neon, and there's actually a ton of symbolism in this card that I'm really proud of. If you look at it carefully, you'll see the Ankh, which is the Egyptian symbol of life. You've got a monkey here and also an alligator. Those are actually Thoth references too, even though I say I don't like Crowley, you'll actually see some references. There are 2 birds up here, there's lightning, there's color. And so a lot of things are happening here. And if you really have a sharp eye, underneath here, you'll see what looks like the brand name of the jukebox. And it's actually the word Sphinx as the brand, but the Sphinx is actually a correspondence that's in the classic Wheel of Fortune. Justice. My Justice card is inspired by the great Mahalia Jackson. She is a gospel singer. She could really be any gospel singer, but I like Mahalia. So I made her someone who reminded me of Mahalia. This is a scene of social justice, of a woman singing gospel music in a church in front of the congregation. Gospel music played such an important role in the civil rights movement that it essentially became mainstream pop music, and it influenced so much soul music. So my Justice card harkens to that very difficult time in our nation's history. So when you're doing readings with this tarot, you don't necessarily have to give somebody a speech about the civil rights movement every time you turn up this card, or talk about the role of jukeboxes or things like that. But what I want you to know when you look at these cards is, if you know the story behind it, or you know what it might be suggesting to your querent, your querent might be going through something where social justice really speaks to them. And so knowing that this card, more so than maybe other decks, is about social justice and American politics, that might play into a reading. That's why I want you to know about it. The Upside Down. This card is an interpretation of the Hanged One. So instead of having someone who's hanged, I do have the legs in the position that is reminiscent of the old Rider-Waite-Smith Hanged Man, or really the old Marseille. I mean, the Hanged One comes from very old decks. I actually have someone who's, let's just not mince words, on a hallucinogenic trip, which goes along with the iconic story of the musician. I'm not saying that one should do this. I'm just trying to go along with the archetypes of what we all sort of collectively believe to be the musician's way of life. Now, if you look at this and think about the usual meaning of loss of control, and surrendering that goes along with the Hanged One, then we really have the same correspondence, just told in a different way. And if you're really sharp-eyed, notice she's got red hair and the same complexion as our Fool. So is this our little musician all grown up and now she's experiencing this awakening and she's all flipped upside down? Maybe. Depends on how you want to interpret it. And then, of course, the Death card. The Death card in my deck is a conjured spirit. If you're familiar with my first deck, which is the Southern Gothic Oracle, this is from the Haunts. This is the same cemetery. This scene, not this guy, but this scene is from Mount Olivet Cemetery in Nashville. So I painted this before. And so now I have a conjured spirit that's taken more form than he did in my other card. Almost like a Hamlet type thing. He's holding a human skull, and he's this sinister but also sexy version of death, looking at you as though he recognizes you. He knows what change you're about to go through, and he's ready to take you through it. My Temperance card is called Harmony. I love the Temperance card. It's my birth card. It's in many ways called the art card, and with me being a painter, I've always really felt drawn to that card. I chose to use the word harmony because the Temperance card is very much about alchemy, about, we've all seen the classic tarot decks with the mixing of the cups. And so here I have the mixing of two different instruments for perfect and beautiful harmony. So we have musical harmony to get this concept across. It's actually one of my favorite cards in this deck as well. The Devil. This is my friend Brian, who was kind enough to pose as this sinister devil. He's actually a really nice guy. I hope that doesn't ruin the card for you. But I've got him in like a nightclub, right? And I've got him as the Red Devil. And he's got the horns. He's got the scary tattoos. I don't think tattoos are scary. I'm covered in them. However, folks like my grandma do actually, my memo, do find tattoos to be sinister and scary. And it represents this archetype of a bad guy, of the devil's music. And I grew up evangelical, and we were always taught that the devil is beautiful. The devil is seductive. There's a famous song called "The Devil Wears a Suit and Tie." And so I don't have him in a suit and tie. He's bare-chested, but I wanted him to look like this sinister, maybe even like a nightclub owner. And he's drawing you into his fiery red layer. The Tower. Speaking of nightclubs, so this is an image of a classic Mississippi juke joint, which is burning down. If you're not familiar with juke joints, Juke, it's where the word jukebox comes from. A juke joint and jukin, which is a kind of Memphis hip hop music. This word goes back to early forms of blues. A juke was usually a privately owned club, and they all had names like Sam's Place, Joe's Joint, stuff like that. And it was always owned by some old guy who could barely pay the rent. Maybe he had inherited an old broken down building or what have you. And we laugh at them and we think they're so charming, but the reason there were juke joints is really because of segregation. It's because of Jim Crow laws. Black folks could not enjoy music and celebrate and go have a drink in the same place that white folks could. And so they were forced to have their own places. And guess what? They made them awesome. So juke joints were amazing. They still are. There aren't that many left. And a lot of people are decrying the loss of the juke joints. And so to me, it was a perfect analogy for the Tower. A juke joint that is burning down in the rain, crumbling, falling apart. Nobody goes there anymore. And nobody goes there anymore for kind of good reasons, because it's good that we are now able to live in a diverse society and celebrate together and not be segregated. So we don't need these havens as much. But also, these are safe places where people could go and just be themselves. So it's sad that they're disappearing. But it's a new era, hence the Tower. Back to country music. So The Star features a young starlet, or at least an aspiring starlet, who wants to be the next big country star or the next great singer. And if you look carefully, you'll see the RCA logo here. This is actually a scene from the front lawn of RCA Studios in Nashville. So this is one of our references to famous recording studios. You're about to see the other one. This is the famous RCA in Nashville. The moon. So the moon It's such a beautiful card. It's one of my favorite cards in any tarot deck. I need a good moon card. And there was no way I was just going to like put a moon in the sky and be done with it. I wanted to think about like how the moon might influence musicians, what kind of musician might be evocative of the feeling of the moon's magic and mystery. And I thought of a young blues singer who's only singing to himself, to his God, to his love, but he's alone in a field and he is only playing his guitar for himself. And we don't know what he's singing about. We don't know what his thoughts are. Only the moon does. The Sun. So this is our other famous recording studios. Sun Studios is here in Memphis, Tennessee. And again, it's a little bit of a visual pun. You can still read this card the same way you would read a sun card that featured the baby and so forth. The sun being the source of clarity, light, energy, and hope. And Sun Studios was that for a long time, for a glorious period in Memphis's history. Sun Studios was this beacon of a new music that was forming. So it certainly makes a good analogy for the sun, I think. Instead of a judgment card, I have the Eon, and I have this Little Richard-esque character. I say Little Richard-esque because he was not a guitarist, he was a pianist. But I wanted this card because the judgment card in certain interpretations is really about a whole new breakthrough, like walking through a portal into a new reality. And it's analogous to judgment in the Bible, right? When we actually walk through into this new reality. This is the musical equivalent of that when pop music became rock and roll. So you had these young Black artists who were breaking through with a whole new sizzly sound that took country and it took what they were calling the most awful name, which was race records back in the day, but it was early R&B, gospel. All of these things were coming together. Blues, gospel, and country were coming together to basically have a baby that was called rock and roll. And so this guy is supposed to remind us of some of those early musicians. The World. This is my only card that does not take place in the South, so to speak, or at least evocative of it. I really see her as more of like a young British rocker. She's also supposed to be the most modern of all the cards because this jumps ahead to really the 1970s with psychedelic rock, with post-Beatles, when we have like it's jumped across the Atlantic to the UK, and now pop music has become a global phenomenon. It's not just Johnny Cash and Elvis and all the folks that were here in the US, the southern US, and the jazz singers of Louisiana. It's now gone to New York, it's gone to the UK, it's everywhere. And behind her, it looks like a planet, but what it really is a drum. And the drum is the most universal of musical instruments. It's the one that unites us as humanity. You know, they talk about the beat of rock and roll being defined by the drum and the drum set. Well, our earliest sounds as humans, as primitive human beings, were percussion. So that's why she's a drummer. That's why there's a giant, iconic planet-like drum behind her as she's in this dreamlike scene. Now, we're not done with the Major Arcana because I added 2 cards. Because the deck is called the Rhythm and Soul, I added a rhythm card and a soul card. So let's talk about those. Quite simply, these are oracle cards. And I like my oracle cards to be very straightforward and very easy to understand. This is meant to be the rhythm of nature. And so you have a croaking frog, you have blinking fireflies, you have tinkling water, you have the rhythm of nature in the colors that come with the green and the gold. And then you have the light of the moon shining down on him or her. I don't know if it's a male or female frog. So basically, this is supposed to show seasons and sounds and day and night and all those beautiful things that we associate with a beautiful nature scene. This is the rhythm of nature with which we are supposed to be aligned as animals. And then soul. So soul music is my favorite genre. I'm obsessed with Memphis soul music. It is my go-to at home sound because I grew up with it. And so this is an imaginary character, but you know, maybe reminiscent of Ann Peebles or any of those other awesome soul singers. And if you look really closely at the card, I wish they hadn't printed it so darkly, but if it's hard, might be hard to see on the video, but in person you can see her soul is floating up out of her body. And we have all heard singers who give so much of themselves and are just so deeply emotional and resonant in their singing that their soul seems to just float right out of their body. They're giving it to us. So these are numbered number 22 and number 23. And I hope that they're easy enough that when people use them, they don't even need to look at the book. They just get it, like giving your whole soul, or the idea of aligning with rhythms. And that's the end of the Major Arcana. I would like to talk about porch cards because I mentioned them at the beginning of this video. And I'm going to pull out the Pawpaw just to demonstrate, okay? So the Pawpaw, again, is the Emperor. If you're familiar with the work of the great Rachel Pollack, who wrote 78 Degrees of Wisdom and is probably the greatest tarot scholar of our time, she wrote about stage cards, in which certain cards in the tarot, specifically the Rider-Waite-Smith, appear to be on a stage. And that gives them an added layer of meaning that maybe it's performative, or maybe it is something that is in some way a show. And I'm really inspired by the idea of stage cards, but since I didn't follow the Rider-Waite symbolism, I don't have the opportunity in my art style to do a stage card. And anyway, you can already get that from another deck. But I started to realize that with many of my cards, they appeared on the front porch. And a lot of life here in the South appears on the porch. And so if you look in your book, I have a section here called Porch Cards. It's on page 44 and 45. I included the Magician too, even though he's not really on a porch, but he is out in front of his house. So we've got the Magician, and we've got the Pawpaw, and even Harmony. So let me move this out of the way. Let's find Harmony. They're upside down, that's why. Okay, so Harmony, the Magician, Pawpaw. Here are three. And there are three more that are in the Minor Arcana. But what I want to do is talk to you about what they mean. So I'm going to read straight from the book. Standing, sitting, talking, and playing music in front of our houses is just a thing that we do in the American South. The majority of our homes down here are built with porches. They serve as a second living room. Whether it's attached to the humblest of sharecropper shacks or wrapped around the facade of a grand mansion, a porch is a place to be yourself and keep a watchful eye on the world outside your door. It's neither inside the house nor outside the house. I mean, it is outside the house, but do you know what I mean? It is neither inside your home, in the private sanctum of your home, but it's also not your home. It's not an outside place. It is a private place and yet semi-public. And so this is a place where we interact with people, and it really is a liminal space of where we begin to understand the idea of home. The door, the window, these all indicate, lim is just Latin for door. So a doorway is what is the word liminal space comes from in spirituality. So when we see these doors and windows behind these characters, think about that transition of home and outside of home when you look at these cards. It's the Magician, right? Let's take these one at a time. If he's talking about what are your fundamental abilities, and then you add the concept of home or at home, then it starts to become like a public or private conversation about where your personal magic is going to come from, right? The Pawpaw is about setting rules. Are you going to follow the rules that were set in your home and your childhood, or are you going to define your own rules? And with Harmony, it has to do with making harmony, maybe with work-life balance. Maybe it's about trying to find harmony in your life at your home or outside of your home, or maybe you are in that liminal space where you haven't been able to find harmony between the two. And so that's where I found the magic of the porch really fed into the symbolism of these cards, and I hope you find that too. Okay, so that concludes our study of the Major Arcana. Please watch my other videos to go through each of the Minor Arcana suits, because they each are founded in a foundational genre of American music. I'll see you there.